The Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794. And if we think about it, I love these French periodic names. The Great Fear, the Storming of the Bastille, the Reign of Terror. And this is when it truly does get crazy, folks. Last class, we really did talk about the capture of the king. When he tried to flee, King Louis XVI, the royal family, Marie Antoinette, are forced back into Paris. But when they're forced back into Paris, the people have turned on them. It's no longer, oh, we love you, king. Thank you for embracing the revolution. Now it's like, why did you leave us? I thought you loved us. I thought we were supposed to be together forever. And you ran away. How could you do this to me? And to add insult to injury, they arrest the royal family when the National Convention and the Sans-Culottes and Jacobites take over. The royal family is arrested, and when they're arrested, they storm the palace. They find this massive iron safe, and inside the iron safe are about 600 papers from Louis XVI, talking smack about the revolution, talking about how he was paying off revolutionary delegates and politicians to put him back in power, and how he also wrote to foreign diplomats to try to crush the French Revolution. So Louis, they were like, Louis, you are so two-faced. You told me you love me, you told me you love liberté, but you talk to aristocrats, what's up with that? So now people are sick of him. They feel like he is a traitor to the people. And Robespierre famously says, he must die so that the nation can live. So in order for us to have a French nation, a true republic, we have to put this traitor behind us, and he is off to the guillotine. And it's believed that 70 to 80,000 people crowded the Parisian streets to watch the beheading of the king. He was put on trial. He was convicted as guilty of treason on multiple charges, and not one single delegate said not guilty. Everyone unanimously said, let's convict him of being guilty. Not everybody wanted to kill him, though. Some people wanted to exile him. Some people wanted imprisonment for life. Thomas Paine, interestingly, wanted to send him to the United States in exile, but eventually he will be guillotined. The national razor will fall. He has his head chopped off. It falls down. People were actually trying to dip their clothes in his blood as like little mementos of the day, which is pretty grotesque. The executioner was selling lockets of his hair to people for a pretty high price to keep it. They show the head to the crowd, and the crowd goes crazy. They're like, vive la révolution, long live liberty. And this king, it used to be the king's body was sacred, was holy, that the king was the mouthpiece of the French nation, of the kingdom of God in flesh. And now we have butchered and desecrated the body of a king, and there's no going back. And note that the national motto of France is Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, Ornement. Key events. So, January, we have the execution of Louis XVI, after which, shortly, we'll get in April the Committee of Public Safety being created. September, the Reign of Terror begins. In October, hey, it's October 1st today, we get the execution of Marie Antoinette. Oh, poor Marie. Allez, Committee of Public Safety. So here we are. So if we think about the French Revolution, always keep in mind, in the background, you have the Revolutionary Wars going on. You're fighting against Austria, Prussia, against Great Britain, ripping the rug out of the French nation, drastically changing their society, as well as fighting wars against monarchies and foreign governments. Is that a lot for a society to deal with? Yeah. People eventually are going to maybe become a bit paranoid. Our revolution, we have spies in our midst. We have scandals in which we have delegates to the National Convention that are being paid by Great Britain or the Prussians or the Austrians. We have extreme corruption. We need to root out the enemies, the counter-revolutionaries, the secret royalists, and deal with them. We also need to direct the war effort, create a national citizen army, and smash the old monarchies and tyrannies of Europe. So this Committee of Public Safety is going to be formed. And the National Convention formed this committee, and what they want to do is they want to centralize power in the hands of roughly, I believe, 11 men in this ruling committee who are now going to be fast-acting, decisive officials that can handle situations. You guys remember in Roman times what people would do in a crisis? Excellent. So in times of crisis, like in Rome, they would have a dictator. They suspend the democratic constitution of 1793. So maybe things like trial by jury is going away. Freedom of the press going away. Freedom of speech going away. And the person that is going to emerge as not the true leader, but the most prominent leader is a gentleman by the name of Maximilien Robespierre, whose name is always connected to the terror. He was known as the Incorruptible. He was someone who worked 18 hours a day, lived off fruit and coffee, believed in moral and virtuous excellence, and wanted to create a government of virtue. Theorized that in order to create this revolution and for it to persevere, that terror and virtue needed to be linked. That the virtuous needed to use terror against those who were not virtuous in order to create this new republic and self-government. He had a lot of admirers, but also a lot of enemies. The Girondins, kind of the less radicals, hated him. But the Sans-Culottes oftentimes thought that he didn't go far enough until later on. He was the famous one that said, "I'm against capital punishment, but I am going to vote in favor of offing the king's head." So if we think about the guillotine, terrifying. It's a big blade that drops down on your neck and severs your head, right? That is terrifying. Heads are a-rolling. But if we think about it, this was supposed to be humane. This was supposed to be a superior, more humane, enlightened way to execute people. And it's interesting because it kind of combines the Enlightenment rationalism and values of execution with the barbarism and craziness of the French Revolution. And in the terror, you're going to have 16,594 people executed by the guillotine. 16,594. Many of them political enemies of the Committee of Public Safety, or royalists, or enemies of the nation, or deemed enemies of the nation. They get their equality in death. 2,600 were killed in Paris alone, and they estimate that 35,000 people died overall in the Reign of Terror. That not everyone was guillotined, some people were just taken outside and shot or stabbed, all these horrible things, quick executions. And note that they're going after enemies of the people, and if we think about it, the right wing of the National Convention, Legislative Assembly, the right wing of France is eliminated already. If you are pro-monarchist, if you are conservative, maybe pro-Catholicism, pro-hierarchy, pro-monarchy, pro-church, pro-aristocracy, you already have shut your mouth, been killed, or left France. So the right wing is eliminated. So you have kind of moderates, maybe center-left to the far left, the radical left. And we've talked about these folks before. The Montagnards, they're called the Mountains because they sat high up in the convention, and they are the most radical Jacobins. They're the ones that want, kill the king, kill Marie Antoinette, let's get rid of the monarchy, let's have some radical reform. Whereas the Girondins, they're more moderate. Let's maybe just exile the king. Let's have small-scale reform. Let's deal with the situation. There is a group of people known as the Émeries. They're getting out of Dodge as fast as they can. So a lot of these monarchists, right, and you don't necessarily even have to be a monarchist in order to be executed. It could be like maybe you said something about a play that was deemed as a royalist comment. Someone heard it, and now you have accusations against you. Maybe you married into the wrong family. Maybe you married people who were royalists even though you're not one yourself. That's all it took. You didn't necessarily have to be a pure conservative monarchist in order to be killed. Anyone could kind of point the finger at anything that you did, which is kind of terrifying, right? They're killing for ideological purity? Are you an enemy of the nation, enemy of the revolution? So a lot of these people, it's no surprise that they're out. They're fleeing. They're going to Austria. They're going into Italy. They're going anywhere they can go to get out of France. 9 of them, prominent émigrés, are captured, and they are executed via guillotine in 1793. Also, rising at this time, the sans-culottes, the people on the street, the lower class on the street, they're becoming increasingly radicalized and want more and more action and pressure the National Convention, and they have one person in their crosshairs. And that one person, it becomes a symbol of absolute monarchy, of everything that was wrong with the old world, and that person is Marie Antoinette. Her husband was already killed. She was deeply depressed. She actually refused to walk in the garden in the Tuileries Palace because it was by her husband's window, and she didn't want to go and see and have to face that. Her children were sick, were depressed. They actually even separated her son from her, and they started abusing and torturing her son, the heir, Louis XVII, and doing all of these terrible things. But she had hope. She believed that her Austrian family was going to save her. Or maybe there would be some royalist that killed the guards and took her out the window, and they would be off, and her trials and tribulations would be over. And she famously said, "Tribulation makes you realize who you are." And these 2 paintings, for a moment, are 10 years apart. And look how much she ages in 10 years. She goes from young lady in her prime to old, tired, depressed, barely getting by. And what ends up happening is she's kind of under house arrest, and someone pays off the guards so that the people of Paris can go see and have a tour of the old Queenie. And a supposed royalist supporter ends up throwing a carnation, a bouquet of roses, at her feet. And in those roses were a secret message. And it said, be ready in a week. We're going to save you. Let me know, respond to this. Do you want to be saved? Are you ready to go? And she ended up taking this note and responding to it. And she gave the note to a guard who she thought was loyal to the monarchy. That guard went right over to the National Convention and said, "I have proof of Marie Antoinette's treason. I have proof that she is an enemy of the revolution and that she is plotting with aristocrats to escape and maybe come back and put her son on the throne." After which, they had a trial. She was accused of incest with her own son and all of these horrible things. She was like, "I'm not even going to reply to such an unnatural statement." And she tried to paint herself as a loving mother, a loving queen, but she was getting the worst insults over and over and over against her. She's found guilty of treason, and she is eventually wheeled out in front of a massive crowd. She has her head cut off via the guillotine, and once again, you have the blood of the monarchy on French soil. Her last words were actually, she apologized to the executioner for tripping over his feet, and that's the last thing she ever said. King Louis XVII died in prison from illness of age 10 in 1795, known as Louis the Uncrowned. Poor little boy. The monarchists have been defeated, conservatives, they're gone, and eventually these moderates, the Girondins, or the Girondins, they're also going to be eliminated. There's a famous situation in which there was what are called Federalist revolts. People believed that there was too much power concentrated in Paris, that Paris was controlling the provinces too much, that this Committee of Public Safety was tyrannical, and that they needed to have a more liberal, kind of constitutional, moderate order take place. And you have Federalist generals, Girondin generals that rise up and actually try to fight off the National Convention. Their troops, they're quickly defeated, but anyone who is associated with the Girondins are then rounded up in mass. They are imprisoned, and they are fed their last supper, and then they are massively executed the next day. Some of them actually killed themselves before, rather than giving their political enemies the joy of killing them. And this is where when you have, after the execution of the Girondins, you even have different factions within the radical Jacobites. People that followed one person. Some people that are known as the Dantonistas. People that, say that 3 times fast. Dantonista, Dantonista, Dantonista. The Dantonistas. People that thought that the violence was going too far. They eventually are going to be executed. So if we think about the French Revolution, they're almost killing for ideological purity. That you had to be the right kind of Republican, the right beliefs in equality, the right family background, the right relationships in life. You had to read the right papers, do everything correctly so that you did not invoke the ire and the outrage of the Committee of Public Safety or get accusations against you. Does that make sense? So you are killing off all the people that disagree with you, even if they moderately disagree with you, because you say they're an enemy of the nation, a foreign agent, someone who's subverting the revolution. And they say things like, you don't have to write this down, we already read this, it is this virtuous people that spills all its blood to found the republic that is imposing to internal enemies and shakes the thrones of tyrants. So they're offing their political enemies, someone like Georges Danton, someone who called for an end to the violence in mass executions. He was critical of the Committee of Public Safety. Other people wanted to ramp it up even more, have more heads rolling like the Herbonistas. And Napoleon said that Robespierre's greatest mistake was sending Danton to the guillotine. That had those two worked together, they could have spared the French nation so much bloodshed. However, Robespierre decided to ally himself with the more radical faction in the Committee of Public Safety and kept the heads a-rolling. Danton's last words were, "I'm so sad that I die 6 weeks before Robespierre." He predicted that the violence would come full circle to Robespierre and that Robespierre himself would be executed, which actually does happen. During this radical time period is like the radical change. So de-Christianization, radical social change, but that is another lecture, another day.